We finished about an hour ago, and we're proud of what came out of it. But, you know, not really in, the game may be in a form to present, but we certainly are not. Anyway, so we chose to take on the issue of human trafficking, so it's super sad that we were the first one chosen. I hope we don't just really take down the mood of the day. Also, maybe starting it up. What's up?
Just get a nice view so you can talk.
Just get a nice view? Okay. So we started with some landscaping. So we used a tool called Gaia to create our scene for this. So our game takes place in this cabin out in the woods, essentially. So the narrative is your name is what is it? Naomi. Yeah, is the other one's lead. Sorry again. You play as a woman named Naomi, whose sister has recently disappeared. You've received text messages from her that are somewhat ominous, which you can explore in the game. And it has brought you to this cabin. You will explore this deserted cabin, looking at the things inside the cabin to figure out what has happened. Also exploring your text messages and hearing some voicemails left by your sister to try to figure out what went on in the past few days. Did you want to talk about the research behind it, I guess?
Sure. So, in doing research for the development of the game, the biggest thing we came to realize is how multifaceted an issue like human trafficking is. It's so complex and there's so many different ways it can be framed, and trying to address that in a game narrative we found to be really challenging, and we really struggled for a long time. As we said before, we were one of the groups that spent a long time trying to figure out what we were going to do before we decided on going for this kind of immersive storytelling with puzzle-driven elements to kind of drive the character through certain clues at what's happening, essentially. The reason we decided to go for this was we realized we would never ever encompass the entire scope of what can be approached or what can be addressed with human trafficking. There's so many different ways that people are exploited around the world. There's forced labor, there's sex trafficking, there's all sorts of things. We couldn't hope to accomplish all of it in one game. So we targeted ourselves down to the narrowed scope of sex trafficking. But even within that topic, it's still a very complex issue because, yeah, there are situations in which people are abducted and held and then used as this commodity for these people who perform trafficking, but there's also times where they're kind of manipulated through exploitation of a variety of vulnerabilities, be it emotional or political or economic. And even then we couldn't hope to address all of those. And so we went for essentially exploitation of an emotional vulnerability in developing the game, just to kind of limit our scope. And I mean, maybe we still didn't limit it enough.
So,
but
I think we should start from the beginning of the game here. Get up and running. You can hear sort of the premise of the narrative, and we can talk a little bit about some of the things you do in the game. Getting it right? Awesome.
Who's your target audience for this game?
That's a good question. We talked about
we primarily, so in designing the game, we primarily had three things in mind. We wanted to raise awareness about the issue. So in that sense, our target audience would be anyone, really. B, however, we wanted to evoke an emotional response that would kind of more forcefully reinforce notions that people may already have. So people who are already in the field working against human trafficking would be a target for that. And I think the evoking of an emotional response was really our main hope in designing the game. So I guess our audience would be people who are already working against it, or even people who have some experience working against it, but maybe not quite the same involvement in the issue as either they think they would like to or we would like them to. And third was to educate But as I said, it's so challenging to address the entire issue, we couldn't possibly educate every aspect of it.
Yeah, and from a more practical standpoint of like who we think would play the game we've framed it in a way that it appears as if it's a more traditional horror game, like a first-person exploration-based puzzle horror game. But as you go through this narrative, it's unveiled to you that the horror is actually something that's very real and very grounded in reality. Something that's, there are no jump scares in this game. There are no, monsters in the closet. There's something much more gross, I guess. So let's start up from the beginning, so you can see what the moment-to-moment gameplay is.
Naomi, everything is fine. You can come see me at that cabin. He'll keep us safe.
That was voice acting by our own Reagan Harper. So at the start, you're approaching this cabin. You can try to open up the door, but it is locked. So you see a keypad to the left. And if you look around to the right, there is a generator. And of course, if you listen, the generator is not on. So your goal here is to find a key code for the keypad and turn on the generator. We, of course, already know the solution to the puzzle, so it's a little, playing dumb. We were speed running this game earlier, picking up this gas can to fill up the generator.
This is the evening show. Your host, Jackson.
Oh boy, please open the door soon. There's the generator, of course, triggers the power in the house to go on, which also triggers a radio to turn on. Yeah, can you just turn off his radio soon? Because, actually, you know what? It's going to play smooth jazz. It's fine. Okay, so open up the phone. This is another big portion. Okay, so this is our depiction of a cell phone. Actually, screenshots of someone's phone. And here you can sort through your texts from your friends and your dad and your sister. So by exploring these text messages, you can find both clues into what's going on in the narrative and the key code to the front door. You get the key code from your sister. I don't mean to spoil all the puzzles for everyone. We're not going to finish the entire game, so you can experience some of these puzzles yourself later.
What was the key code? Was it a 451?
Yeah. Perfect. Cool. Okay, and here we see some objects lying around, which you can pick up and interact with. Little notes that you can look at.
And much of the storytelling is told through these notes and the phone.
Oh.
We particularly use the notes as that way to work in the theme of her exploring and figuring out what happened with her sister. So while you are just exploring this house, there aren't like, oh, the house is going to tell you what's happening. The notes will eventually spell out to you what exactly happened to her sister and kind of helping her figure out an awareness of what is going on in the world around her.
And the irony of that is that these are simple tasks that you might go through every day, picking up objects in your home, your office, and but you're not really aware of the impact that human trafficking has in your daily community that honestly most people are not aware of.
Yeah, actually, Jesse did a whole lot of research into a lot of these little notes, filling in a lot of the blocks of the narrative. Jesse, you want to talk about that? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, so in designing the notes, I wanted to see if we can, even though we couldn't provide a full depiction of all the different complexities of human trafficking. I wanted to see if we could maybe hint at some of them, or like maybe provide a grounds for users to maybe start doing some of their own research on the issues that weren't like explicitly discussed by this game in particular. I also wanted them to give the user a sense of the kind of person who was partaking in this form of trafficking, as well as how events came about that could lead to this occurring. So the notes are a lot of things. They're mostly, some of them are records and things that this person is doing to keep track of what they're doing, etc., stuff like that. Later on, there is one note written by the main character's sister that is the most prominent piece in the entire game, that kind of is what establishes that emotional response, is our hope, at least.
Yeah, so here we kind of race through it, but we're right about at the end. We get to this, which this is. You can head out.
We elected to cut out some of the audio because of some graphicness.
Yeah.
Oh, there's.
Yeah. And then, of course, ending with these statistics, and a call to action at the end.
What we chose to ignore in the audio was a call from your sister that was a little graphic, but she was telling you to run. So that's what we missed leading up to the car coming up to you. Anything else? That is our game.
Thank you very much.
We'll ask one or two questions from the judges. Is that right? One or two questions from our judges.
Does she ultimately find her sister? Is it a rescue attempt, or is it just an awareness?
So it's actually a little ambiguous in the result. The car that pulls up, as you can see, you can't tell who's in it. One of the driving points, this is a bit of a spoiler, I guess, but like that we were kind of going for a red herring of what the game would actually be about, were the texts that the main character had from her dad. The main character herself being a runaway as what initiated the game. And so the eventual result was left to be ambiguous as to whether it was the sister returning with the trafficker or whether it was the dad.
Another question from the judges.
I have one. So what is the call to action, or is there a call to action for people who are players of this game?
So the call to action mainly was to go to the what was it? The
Pittsburgh Action Against Rape is the local chapter here that really supports rape victims and then victims of sexual assault and sexual trafficking as well. They are one of the smaller groups in the area that does, but there are plenty of national groups as well.
Yeah, in this prototype of the game, that call to action was basically a line of text at the end, in like at the end of a very shocking moment. So in that, we hope it's impactful, but of course, if we're able to flesh this out more, we hope we could flesh out a little bit more than a single line of text.
So who would actually be playing this game? Is there a gender, and is there an age, and what's the distribution to get people to actually play this game?
The idea behind this would be to have anybody and everybody play it. Over this past weekend, we've worked a lot and learned a lot ourselves about human trafficking, sexual trafficking, and it's just one of those things that you're not really exposed to on a regular basis. So we want to kind of put it out there to people to become aware of the fact that this is happening in broad daylight. This isn't just something that's like behind closed doors. This is happening to people, the people they know in their lives. This is happening to people of all demographics all over the world, but it's not really something we talk about. So we're kind of putting it out there to everybody to become aware and have it be a point of conversation for us to do something about it.
And going off that, I think how we had said earlier, it's important to stage this as a game that's, something else that, you come into this game not knowing exactly that it's about this human trafficking aspect. I share the example where we're doing this research and I find out that I live 20 minutes from here, and filling letters to like my parents, so that warning them about this issue that I had no idea, and the parents been going on for the past like 10 years, and I live in this neighborhood, go to this school all the time, and was never aware of this. And so we hope that this game is open to anyone to just bring awareness that this is an actual issue in our society.